Hello everyone and welcome to Traffic Corner Tuesday. My name is Nancy Crow and I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Spack Consulting and your host for today's session. Let's see. All right, before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple housekeeping details. Please mute your mics. Muting your mics to minimize the background noise will help allow everyone in the presentation to hear our presenter clearly. And also, join the conversation. Today's presentation is intended to be an interactive dialogue, and I would encourage you and all of the attendees to feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. You don't need to wait till the end to ask a question. Our presenter today would be happy to answer your questions throughout the presentation, so just type your question into the chat area and we will address your message throughout the presentation. All right, and then I want to introduce today's presenter. Mike Spack is the president of Spack Consulting, and he is the recognized industry leader of traffic studies. He is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, past president of North Central section of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and a fellow of the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Since 1996, Mike has led over 1,000 traffic engineering projects. During the past 2 decades, Mike has founded 4 companies, including Spack Consulting, and is the creative force and principal writer of the industry-leading blog, Mike on Traffic. He is an accomplished author with articles published in industry publications, as well as several industry manuals that are used by engineers around the world. So please welcome Mike Spack.
Thanks, Nancy. I appreciate that intro. Sometimes Brian Fisek with Spack Consulting, our vice president, joins me as well, but he is out of the office today. So Nancy touched on this a little bit. Today we're coming to you from a bunch of different organizations and companies, but kind of the blanket is Spack Enterprise with Spack Consulting and Spack Academy leading the way. So as a thank you for everyone in attendance, we'll have details at the end of this on how to get a free sample study. Today we'll be covering kind of our new traffic impact study format, and we'd be happy to send you a PDF of one of the studies we've done in this new format, so stay tuned for that. So as I mentioned today, we will be giving an overview of the new format. I'll go through a PDF case study, which we can email you later, and then also show you our template, our Microsoft Word template that we came up with, and some of the other resources to tie things together. Coming up in mid-February, we're going to be talking about crash analysis and going through some case studies there on Valentine's Day. So if you're looking for something romantic to do, join us on February 14th, and then on the 28th, we're going to be talking about parking at large mixed-use developments and a case study on how to right-size the parking versus just taking what the city code gives and often ends up with an excess of parking. So starting out with our format, kind of the evolution of where we began 20 years ago and where we are now. When I started doing impact studies, pretty basic Word documents with graphics done in, we actually used a mix of AutoCAD and Corel Draw. Then about a decade ago, ITE came out with a recommended practice guide, and it had an outline in there and format, and here at Spack Consulting, we switched over to follow that more closely. Then a couple years ago with the software program from PTV, Vistro, that really streamlined how we do impact studies. And it's a tool for doing the forecasting, capacity analysis all in one software program, but really the genius of the program, for blog readers of mine, they know I've blogged about it since the beginning. It produces all of the graphics and tables you need, and we changed our report format to basically put all of that material in the appendices and streamline the front Word document around that. Today we're going to be going over kind of the big changes that we've had, that we've been working on this winter and rolled out here at the beginning of the year. That is our next evolution. And with that, I'm going to switch over in a minute to a PDF case study to show you the different pieces, but a couple of the areas we really honed in on were, one, making sure we have a tight executive summary that city engineers, city council members, basically non-traffic engineers could read and understand. Switch more to trying to use visuals instead of text, so we're trying to move things into tables and graphics to make things easier, especially the important information, have that jump out at you. And you'll see once we get to our summary graphs around level of service, one big change that I made, and it's been something that's bothered me since the beginning of my career, is when we use level of service grades at a side street stop sign intersection and sometimes show for a single vehicle in the peak hour, that car may be waiting there 90, 100 seconds, but we're showing it at level of service F, and then getting into a public hearing and trying to explain why level of service F is bad at an all-way stop, at a traffic signal, at a roundabout, but how level of service F is completely okay at a stop sign as long as we deem it so. So we've worked to try to streamline how we communicate acceptable versus unacceptable operations. And then lastly, I'll flip through the appendix and show you some of the VSTRO outputs, and we've come up with some boilerplate appendix material that explains some of our jargon and how level of service works, to take that out of the body of the report, so those who are familiar with those concepts don't get bogged down with those sections in the standard ITE process format. We've moved that to the appendix, so it's there as a resource for people who need it. So with that, I'm going to switch over from the PowerPoint and get into our case study. For those who've been following along, we have a fancy new logo here that we rolled out at the end of the year for Spack Consulting. Pretty simple layout here for the cover page. We wanted to just keep it clean, not too distracting. Sign off here. Some states require a PE to sign off on traffic impact studies. Some don't. In Minnesota, actually, we do not have to sign as a PE, but since we are PEs putting these studies together, we've decided we're going to sign them. So then when I get into the executive summary, which I feel is very important, we have a clear kind of paragraph about what is this study and why are we doing the study, and then hone in on a couple of the key results. Again, this isn't a blow-by-blow of every single thing in the study, but more of a summary of the big important takeaways. And then I firmly believe in having crystal clear recommendations, and this is something born out of a presentation I saw early in my career after it was a follow-up basically that talked about the space shuttle explosion, and it turned out the failure on that was a gasket and it was too cold, and the engineers deep down actually believed it was going to be a problem, and when the upper management pushed them, they were wishy-washy on if it would be a problem or not. They basically laid out the facts as they saw them, but let upper management interpret what those facts meant, and of course resulted in a tragedy. Out of that presentation I saw, they strongly argued that it's our responsibility as engineers to interpret our data and make clear recommendations. So we like to do that, of have the bullet points of what we believe should be done. Okay, then we roll on. Pretty standard table of contents. You'll see that the front of the document is actually pretty short, only 13 pages of the report, but then down here you'll notice our document is actually about 130 pages. So get into an introduction, talk about the proposed development, purpose of the study, and the study objectives, just to lay out what we are doing. We have a language of traffic engineering guide that's included in the appendix to help get up to speed with jargon. We don't bog down the report with defining everything. Along with the study objectives, we roll out what the study intersections are going to be. And then all of that is pretty normal stuff. This is where we started making tweaks. Under existing conditions, in the past we used to take Highway 22 and we would describe all of this in text and take a paragraph or two for each of the study corridors. We decided to move to a table, so people, if this is important to them, they can quickly come down and see the name, the designation, if it's a state or a county road, along with here in Minnesota, I think this is pretty unique in the country. We have a designation for some state highways, our trunk highways, county state aid highways versus county roads, and that's based on gas tax designations, etc. But then speed limits, configuration, talk about transit a little bit, but then come down here who operates it. So trying to give a quick snapshot of what's going on in a table versus bogged down text. Then we talk about the study intersections and traffic volumes and how we went out there and collected turning movement volumes and how that data is included in the appendix. You'll notice here we have moved to collecting 2 days worth of counts. Sometimes we do 13 hours. If we think it's going to be really light overnight, we're not going to do the 24-hour counts, but if we think there's some nighttime activity, we'll actually collect a full 48-hour turning movement count. That allows us to look at the peak hours, see if one day is an anomaly versus the other. Assuming they are not, then we end up just averaging the 2 days peak hours together, we feel is a more representative way of showing normal conditions, and then flag what the typical peak hours will be. Next section, rolling in, we talk about forecasting, how we go about doing our trip generation forecast. This is pretty basic stuff for any traffic engineer. Trip generation, when possible, which is actually recommended in the trip generation manual, we try to collect our own local data, and we do have a big spreadsheet data set at tripgeneration.org that we share. But first and foremost, that is us collecting our own data so we can use those in our studies. We have not yet collected at specialty retail, so we utilized the ITE data on that. And then some folks will put on a map the trip distribution percentages. We default to just describing the general direction the distributions come from. And then go through non-site traffic forecasting of bumping up with a growth factor, our traffic volumes to get them to a future year without the development, and then we layer on the forecasted volumes to get the total traffic. And we describe all that, and then the resultant turning movement count diagrams and all that math is shown in the appendix diagrams that are produced from Vistro software. So next section, and here's where we're going to start getting into big changes, the analysis. We're still going with our study scenarios, our study hours. We're doing the full level of service analysis, the grades. We're doing queuing. We're describing all of that. We're putting all of those results in the appendix. But as we go on, here's the huge change. We take for the AM peak hour, the PM peak hour, signal, we are showing the different scenarios. There's only one signalized intersection in this study, so we're showing the average delay versus here, and then also calling out that our level of service DE boundary is up here. And you can see there's only slight changes as we move through our different scenarios in both the AM and the PM peak hour. Then roll through that, we would have similar charts if we have always stops or roundabouts. We don't in this case, but we do have a couple of, we have 4 different side street stop sign controlled intersections. And after much debate internally, we decided we're still going to show all of the level of service calculations in the appendix, but we feel a much more appropriate measure of effectiveness for when we need to do something at an intersection is based on queuing. That's what we've, at least in the Midwest here, seem to do, and that's what we've defaulted to at Spack Consulting for, I think we go back a decade to really honing in on the queues. We just draw that line of at 5 vehicles, that represents unreasonable queuing in our opinion, that 95th percentile queue. I will say this is subjective. We have spent a tremendous amount of time trying to research, are there any standards out there for what is a bad queue versus what is acceptable? We haven't been able to find any. So we basically draw the line between 5 and 10 vehicles, but for this study in this area, we've drawn the line at 5 vehicles in the 95th percentile queue. So that was the AM. Then we go ahead and show the PM and even longer queues. We're getting into 16 vehicles. So that leads us into the mitigation discussion then of going through different scenarios. The traffic signals were okay. If you remember, we're well below, really operating in the level of service B range. But just a couple of those intersections have queuing, so we go through that and end up with a roundabout recommended at one of those intersections. Then from there, we go into our conclusions, recommendations. You'll remember from the front, the executive summary, we had a couple of bullet points under the conclusions. Here we actually lay out more of a description of everything going on in here. And then roll into, based on those findings, here are our clear recommendations on how to mitigate that. So a quick 12-page front report, and then we get into a 100-plus page appendix here for a pretty basic impact study with 5-6 intersections and 1 land use. You'll see we have site plan, we have kind of a glossary of terms, we have our traffic counts, we have a detailed trip generation table, we have all of the level of service calculations, and those include all the turning movement diagrams for the different scenarios. And that's kind of summary, and then we get into all of the diagrams. So just to quickly scroll through. Site plan, I'm not going to, it actually is big. We should have scrunched that down, but we'll scroll through that if somebody wanted to see the full site plan. Then we get into the language of traffic engineering, and hopefully everyone has signed up through the blog Mike on Traffic. If you sign up to get Mike on Traffic as a newsletter, you'll also be put on a list to get our research briefs, and we send out about 1 a month on different topics. And this language of traffic engineering PDF is part of that series, so we thought we would just reuse that and put it into our appendix here. It's got a bunch of the different terms and definitions. Then we get into standard turning movement diagram tables, which we do under our Traffic Data Inc. company. We'll scroll through those. Then another cut sheet from, this was our 3rd research brief, but goes through and describes the level of service in detail, what it means, how it's calculated. Bar chart here showing unsignalized versus signalized, and then kind of what does this mean and what's acceptable and not. And then here we start getting into the Vistro printouts, and we love these in that, so here's the AM existing, the 3 study intersections in the scenario gives the breakdown. You'll notice 2-way stop control, so it gives the level of service of the worst approach. So we have 48 seconds level of service E, but again, going back, we decided in the report to hone in on the queuing instead of really highlighting that delay. Level of service calcs from the HCM for each of the study intersections, including the signal with its timing in there. And then from there we start to get into diagrams showing the traffic control around the study intersections, lane configurations. We have the base volume, so for that peak hour, the turning movement diagrams. And since it's existing, if we scroll down, we'll get into showing then the forecast build-out volume. So that is the case study in a nutshell. So I'm going to close out of that, and in our last 5 to 10 minutes here, seeing we don't have any questions, I'm going to show you what we've done to make ourselves more efficient. It was a huge efficiency, excuse me. Let's see, Jay Luna. It seems like the conclusions and recommendations in the executive summary and at the end of the document should be the same text. They are the same text, but we decide in the executive summary to abbreviate and remove some of the bullet points that we feel are more nuances. And in the executive summary, we only include the bullet points that we feel are that high level important for a city council member or a lay person to read. But you could certainly choose to just copy paste from one to the other. But we decided in the executive summary, we want it to be a little more brief. So to flip over to our Word document, a big change for us is making this template. And we've done this so an admin on staff can populate about 40% of the document, actually much more than that, and really let the engineers just work on the analysis, the mitigation, and the conclusions. Let's see, another question. For your volume figures, are those produced directly by Vistro? Yes, they are directly produced by Vistro, and Chris says he typically does it in CAD MicroStation, and we used to do that, and yes, it has literally using Vistro and just accepting their default figures has resulted in us cutting our time about in half to produce an impact study, because it does take a lot of time and also is a place to introduce typos and that type of errors, getting numbers transposed. So back to the Word document. One thing we've done is the admin, we give her our proposal, Kathy, and it has the name of the development in it, it has our study intersections, it has where the project is located, so it has a lot of the scoping details, and she takes those and then just does a find replace, puts in the brackets, development, and then we'll type in find that and replace all with Miller land development, and then put in the city state. What that ends up doing is then throughout it will change development, city, state up there, it'll change it up here, it will change it throughout the whole document, so she only has to do it once. And that was a big step forward for us. Also put in things like state, we flagged items in the parentheses, or we make X's and Y's where she needs to go through. These are highlights telling her these are things to change and to input to the new format. This is all for the engineer to fill in. Gets to the table, so that's all set up. You can see this is just a lot of boilerplate. Purpose of the study, study objectives, all of this generally stays the same. The road corridors, if we're going to do daily volume analyses, the intersections, this all populates. She'll put in road 1, and then that will ripple effect through the whole study. And also then the engineer or Kathy, depending on who has time, we've taught her how to gather some of this information as well and highlight where she's unsure, so the engineer can go back and check. So you'll notice from the case study, it's all the same, but we've very much made it a template, so there's a lot of find, replace, and then just placeholders for the text to be updated. And when we get to the bar charts along here, we have spreadsheets set up, and they are tied to the Word document. so that we can update and do the same find replace throughout this document, and then input the delay numbers from the VSTRO report. So this is, the engineer does this and looks very close at this, but then it populates the charts and they automatically update in the Word document. So we are trying to make this very cookbook so the engineers can focus on the engineering, but we're also trying to reduce the number of times we do data entry. And then the last benefit is make it so we can easily change. We've all had the studies that come back and say, well, can you add this intersection, or can you change the size of the development changed by a few percent, but we need to update the trip generation, which then updates all of the capacity analysis and everything, and has this huge ripple effect. But with this setup, we can do those kinds of revisions very fast. So again, scroll through the documents and you'll see boilerplate. We have all the charts called out, so it's all standard. Of course, we can update the document if, for instance, we weren't doing an AM peak hour. Maybe we're doing a Saturday analysis at a shopping center instead. We could change that out. And then we have boilerplate with sections if we're going to add in kind of a site plan review, multimodal review. Here are all the things the engineer should be thinking about and populating, and then back to the conclusions, recommendations, our standard appendix filled out. So with that, please, if anyone has questions, go ahead and put them in now. We only have a couple minutes left, so we'll fly through. I went through the case study, went through the template here. Thank you very much, Jay, Luna, and Chris, for your questions. I'm not seeing any others, so we'll just keep moving. We promised at the beginning, you can either text us here at 44222, and text the word traffic corner, and I believe whatever your data rates are will apply, but I think everyone has free texting on their smartphone now. Or feel free to email Nancy, ncrow with an E, at spackconsulting.com, and she will, either way, we will get you the PDF of the case study, the live traffic study that we went through, so you can see that and have that as a reference for you. Jeff asked, did I say that attendees can get the template? And no, I did not say that. Over at Spack Academy, we have a lot of templates and training materials, and there we will be selling the template. It did take us quite a while to put that together, so it will be for sale, and please sign up for, we're going to be selling that, but we will be giving a discount code for those who get the case study. So if you are interested in that, I think we'll be giving 50% off on that, so you can get the Word document. And when you get the Word document template and you buy it, it is yours to freely use and modify. So last here, 12:58, 2 minutes left. Feel free if anyone else has any other questions to populate them. Otherwise, let you know in a couple weeks. We are trying to hone in on a recurring event of doing this the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month. We're going to do the traffic corners. Our next one happens to be on Valentine's Day, February 14th, and we're going to be covering crash analysis, running through some case studies, and we had a good corridor where we did intersection analysis as well as look at the corridor as a whole. So we'll go through some of the tools we use for doing that and what the results are. So with that, thank you everyone. Feel free back here at mspack@spackconsulting.com. If you have any questions for me offline, feel free to email me. I always love feedback, and if you have any other ideas for other traffic corner topics, we are always here to help. Thanks everyone. Talk to you later.